The first-class cabin of Flight 447 gleamed under soft overhead lights, all cream leather, polished armrests, and the faint scent of lavender. Passengers settled into wide seats, champagne flutes balanced on tray tables. Quiet jazz hummed through hidden speakers. Diane Matthews stepped through the navy curtain separating first class from the rest of the plane. She wore faded jeans, white sneakers, and an ivory blouse, simple, comfortable, unremarkable. Her carry-on rolled smoothly behind her. She glanced at her boarding pass, seat 1A, window, first class. She moved down the aisle with calm efficiency. No hesitation. No apology in her posture. A flight attendant appeared in her path. Blonde hair pulled tight in a bun, uniform perfectly pressed, name tag reading Brenda. Her smile was professional. Her eyes were not. "Excuse me." Brenda's voice carried across the cabin. "This section is first class." Diane stopped and smiled politely. "Yes, I know. I'm in 1A. She extended her boarding pass. Brenda didn't look at it. She snatched it from Diane's hand, glanced down for less than a second, then tore it cleanly in half. The rip echoed in the sudden silence. She dropped both pieces at Diane's feet. "Economy is through that curtain. Don't make me call security." Gasps rippled through the cabin. A businessman in 2B froze mid-sip. A woman across the aisle covered her mouth. Diane didn't flinch. She bent slowly, retrieved the torn fragments, and straightened. Her eyes met Brenda's. Steady, unreadable, patient. "I purchased this ticket," Diane said quietly. "This is my seat." Brenda crossed her arms. "I'm sure you did, but there's been a mistake. Please move." The word mistake hung in the air like smoke. Her name was Diane Matthews, 52 years old, mother of 2. Widow for 3. 27 years ago, she'd started as a baggage handler at a regional airport in Cleveland. Overnight shifts in sub-zero temperatures, lifting 60-pound suitcases until her shoulders screamed. She'd worked her way through business school one night class at a time, operations coordinator, customer service manager, VP of passenger experience. Every rung earned, every door forced open. 3 weeks ago, the board of Skylift, Airline's hemorrhaging money and reputation, after a viral discrimination scandal, had hired her as CEO. The first black woman to lead a major U.S. carrier. She'd asked for one thing before her official start date: to travel anonymously. No entourage, no press releases, no first-class lounge escorts, just a regular ticket on a regular flight. She wanted to see the company as passengers did, to feel what they felt. Now, standing in the aisle with torn paper in her hands, she understood exactly what she was inheriting. Around her, passengers whispered. Some held up phones recording. Others looked away, embarrassed for her or themselves. Diane couldn't tell which. Brenda tapped her watch. "Ma'am, we need to close the cabin door. Please comply." Diane glanced at the other first-class passengers. A white man in a hoodie and basketball shorts lounged in 3A, earbuds in, unbothered. A teenage boy in wrinkled clothes sprawled across 4C. No one had questioned them. She looked back at Brenda, saw the certainty in her expression, the performance of authority. Diane could end this in 5 seconds. 1 sentence. 1 phone call. But something stopped her. She wanted to see how far this would go, how deep the rot ran, how automatic the assumptions were. "All right," Diane said softly. "I'll move." Brenda's smile returned, tight, victorious. "Thank you for your cooperation." Diane walked back through the curtain, carry-on rattling behind her. Heads turned as she passed through economy. Some curious, some pitying, some carefully blank. A younger flight attendant, a South Asian man with kind eyes, approached her near row 15. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry about the confusion. Let me help you find your seat." 32D, Diane said. She didn't correct him, didn't explain, just kept walking. The seat was a middle, wedged between a sleeping teenager by the window and a heavy-set man whose shoulder bag spilled into her space. She tucked her carry-on into the overhead bin, sat down and buckled in. The plane's engines roared to life. Through the gap in the seats ahead, she could see the edge of the first-class curtain, that arbitrary barrier between comfort and indignity. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Board meeting confirmed for tomorrow, 9 a.m. Press release goes live at 8, ready to change the world. Diane typed back, already started. She closed her eyes as the plane lifted off. Felt the familiar pressure in her ears, the tilt of ascent. Around her, passengers settled into their routines, movies, magazines, sleep. But Diane's mind was a chessboard. Pieces moving into position. She thought of the email she'd received last week from Skylift's head of HR. A glossy report about improved diversity metrics and inclusive training. Programs, graphs showing progress, testimonials from focus groups. All of it, she now understood, was theatre. The real company wasn't in boardrooms or policy manuals. It was here, in Brenda's hands tearing a boarding pass, in the passengers who'd looked away, in the automatic, unthinking cruelty of "you don't belong here." Diane opened her eyes, pulled out her tablet, began taking notes. An hour into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers dozed or stared at screens. Diane sat still, hands folded in her lap. The man beside her snored softly. The teenager's head lolled against the window. She felt the old, familiar weight settle over her shoulders, the exhaustion that came not from physical labor, but from being perpetually questioned, doubted, erased. She'd been 14 the first time a store clerk followed her through aisles, assuming theft. 23 when a colleague asked if she was the diversity hire. 36 when a client requested someone more senior after seeing her face. Each time she'd swallowed it, smiled, moved forward. Proven herself again and again until the doubters fell silent. But sitting here, knees pressed against the seat ahead, she felt something crack open inside. Not anger, not even surprise. Just a bone-deep weariness at how little had changed. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby, you can't fix what people refuse to see." Diane had spent her whole life trying to prove that wrong, believing that excellence would speak louder than prejudice. That hard work would override assumptions, and it had, mostly. She'd climbed. She'd succeeded. She'd shattered ceilings. But Brenda hadn't seen a CEO. She'd seen skin color and made a decision in half a heartbeat. Diane touched the side pocket of her purse, felt the outline of a small pin inside, a tiny pair of wings, gold and scratched with age. Ms. Lorraine's wings. A promise, a reminder. When people tell you no, you make them say yes. Diane straightened in her seat, pulled out her phone, began writing. Diane's mother had cleaned rooms at the Airport Plaza Hotel, the place where flight crews stayed between routes. Young Diane would wait in the lobby after school, homework spread across a vinyl couch. Watching pilots and attendants glide through in crisp uniforms, they'd looked like superheroes to her, untouchable, free. One attendant, an older black woman named Ms. Lorraine Carter, noticed Diane staring. She sat down beside her one afternoon, smelling faintly of coffee and jet fuel. "You want to fly, baby?" Diane had nodded, shy and certain. Ms. Lorraine smiled. "Then you study hard. And when people tell you no, and they will, you make them say yes, Diane." Learned later that Ms. Lorraine had been one of the first black flight attendants hired in the FUI, 1970s. She'd faced death threats. Passengers who refused her service. Colleagues who wouldn't speak to her. She'd endured it all with grace Diane couldn't fathom. Before Ms. Lorraine retired, she gave Diane a tiny wings pin, the kind airlines used to give children. "Keep this," she'd said. "Remember where you come from, and who you're flying for." Ms. Lorraine had died 5 years ago. Diane still carried the pin everywhere. Now, 35,000 feet above the country, Ms. Lorraine had fought to navigate with dignity. Diane felt the weight of that legacy. Skylift's board hadn't hired her for revolution. They'd hired her for optics, A black woman CEO to smooth over PR disasters, reassure investors, quiet the boycotts. They'd expected performative change. Diversity panels, revised training manuals, a few high-profile hires. Diane had accepted the job knowing exactly what they wanted, and she'd decided to give them something else entirely. She opened her tablet, pulled up Skylift's internal employee portal, entered her new credentials. CEO-level access activated just this morning. The system opened like a vault. Diane navigated to the crew management database, typed in Brenda Kowalski. The file appeared instantly. 15 years with Skylift, senior flight attendant, multiple commendations for excellent customer service, eligible for a leadership track promotion next quarter. Diane scrolled down, found the section labeled Incident Reports, 6 complaints, all within the last 8 years. She opened them one by one. Passenger complaint, March 2019. Attendant was dismissive and rude when I asked for assistance. Made me feel unwelcome. Passenger name, Deshawn Harris. Passenger complaint, June 2020. Told me I didn't look like a first-class passenger. Demanded additional ID. Passenger name, Amara Okafor. Passenger complaint, November 2021. Refused to serve me. Said she was too busy, but served other passengers immediately. Passenger name, Luis Ortega. Each complaint had been reviewed. Each had been dismissed. Supervisor's notes used the same phrases. Misunderstanding. No malicious intent. Attendant has exemplary record. Diane's jaw tightened. She took screenshots, saved them to a secure folder. Then she pulled up the crew manifest for Flight 447. 9 attendants total. She cross-referenced their names with the complaint database. 3 others had similar patterns. Different passengers. Same excuses. Same dismissals. This wasn't one bad employee. This was a culture. A system that protected its own and ignored everyone else. Diane heard laughter from the front of the plane. Brenda's voice carried faintly over the hum of engines. Talking with another attendant in the forward galley, Diane unbuckled, stood, walked up the aisle toward the sound. The forward galley was small, barely wide enough for 2 people. Brenda stood with her back to the aisle, holding a phone. Another attendant, a white woman in her 30s, leaned against the counter. Diane stopped just outside, close enough to hear. "Did you see her face?" Brenda's voice was low, but not low enough. "They always think they can sneak into first class." The other attendant murmured something Diane couldn't catch. Brenda continued, "I've been doing this 15 years. I know who belongs where. Trust your gut, you know." Diane's pulse quickened. She pulled her own phone from her pocket, opened the voice memo app and let it record. "Some people just don't understand how things work," Brenda said. "You give them an inch?" The other attendant laughed nervously. "Brenda, come on. What?" "I'm just saying. Standards exist for a reason." Diane stepped into the galley entrance. Both women turned. "Excuse me," Diane said calmly. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor. In person." "After we land." Brenda's face flickered, surprise then annoyance. "Ma'am, if you have a complaint, you can fill out a form online. I'm asking you directly for a supervisor's name and contact information." Brenda sighed. The exaggerated patience of someone dealing with a difficult child. "Look, I'm sorry you're upset, but I was doing my job. Company policy is very clear about..." "About what?" Diane interrupted, her voice still soft. "About who belongs in first class." Brenda's eyes hardened. "About verifying tickets. If you want special treatment, that's not how this works." Diane held her gaze. "I don't want special treatment. I want accountability." For a flicker, Brenda's confidence wavered. Then she recovered, shrugged. "Take it up with corporate. I'm sure they'll be very concerned." She turned away, dismissive. Conversation over. Diane stood there for another moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you. I will." She walked back to her seat, sat down, stopped the recording. The man beside her glanced over. "You okay?" Diane smiled faintly. "I will be." The plane descended through clouds, engines shifting pitch. Diane watched through the window as the city appeared below, rivers of light against dark earth. The seatbelt sign chimed. Passengers stirred, gathering belongings. Diane waited until the plane taxied to the gate, until the cabin door opened and the first-class passengers began deplaning. She stayed seated, watching them file past, the businessman, the teenager, the man in the hoodie, all moving effortlessly into their lives. Finally, the economy section began to empty. Diane stood, pulled down her carry-on and walked toward the exit. At the door, the captain stood in the cockpit entrance, saying polite goodbyes. He was older, silver-haired, weathered by years in the sky. His name tag read Captain J. Rhodes. Diane paused, extended her hand. Captain Rhodes. Smooth flight. He shook it automatically. Thank you, ma'am. Safe travels. Diane smiled, small, tired, but absolutely certain. I'll see you at headquarters tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. His face went blank. I'm sorry? I'm Diane Matthews. Your new CEO. We need to talk. The color drained from his face. Behind him in the galley, Brenda froze mid-laugh, phone slipping in her hand. Diane didn't wait for a response. She stepped into the jetway, carry-on rolling behind her, and pulled out her phone. She dialed the board chair. He answered on the second ring. Diane, how was the flight? It's worse than we thought, she said quietly. I need an emergency executive meeting. Tonight. And I need the HR files for every flight attendant on Flight 447. What happened? Everything we were afraid of. And more. She paused at the terminal window, watching the plane through the glass. We're not fixing this with a training seminar. We're rebuilding from the ground up. She hung up. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of what was coming. 27 years she'd been preparing for this. To lead, to rebuild, to prove that change was possible. But standing here, alone in a fluorescent-lit corridor with travelers rushing past, she felt the enormity of it. One company, 50,000 employees, millions of passengers, and a culture so broken it didn't even recognize its own CEO as human. Diane thought of Miss Lorraine's wings pin, of her mother's hands cracked from bleach and stubborn hope, of every young black girl who'd board a plane tomorrow and wonder if she was welcome. She straightened her shoulders, walked toward baggage claim, and began planning the reckoning. By midnight, Diane sat alone in a hotel conference room, laptop open, files spread across the table. The emergency board meeting had ended an hour ago. Voices raised. Concerns about lawsuits, warnings about moving too fast. She'd listened, nodded, then told them exactly what would happen starting tomorrow morning. Now, in the silence, exhaustion hit like a wave. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter. Mom saw you're trending on Twitter. Are you okay? Trending? Of course. Someone had posted the video. Brenda tearing the boarding pass, Diane's calm face, the gasps from other passengers. It had 7 million views already. Diane didn't reply. She set the phone face down and stared at the wall. The weight of what she'd started pressed against her chest. She thought of the employees who'd lose their jobs, the families affected, the inevitable backlash, people saying she was overreacting, being divisive, playing the race card. She'd heard it all before, would hear it again. But then she thought of the 6 complaints in Brenda's file, the passengers whose dignity had been shredded at 30,000 feet, the children watching, learning that some people simply didn't belong. Diane reached into her purse, pulled out Miss Lorraine's wings pin, held it under the conference room's harsh light. The gold was tarnished. The clasp barely held, but it was still here. Still flying, she pinned it to her blouse, opened a new document, and began writing the speech she'd deliver in 6 hours. At 7 a.m., Diane stood in Skylift's headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel near the airport. Employees streamed through the lobby, coffee in hand, unaware their world was about to shift. She'd arrived early, met with HR, reviewed personnel files, made decisions that would echo through every department. Now, In the executive conference room, she faced her leadership team, 12 vice presidents, the COO, the CFO, and Captain Rhodes, who'd been summoned at dawn. Rhodes looked ill. He hadn't slept. Neither had Brenda, who sat in a smaller room down the hall with an HR representative and a union lawyer. Diane stood at the head of the table. "No notes, no script. Yesterday," she began, "I boarded Flight 447 as a passenger, not as your CEO, as a customer. I wanted to see what we actually are, not what we claim to be." She let the silence settle. "A flight attendant tore my boarding pass in half, told me I didn't belong in first class, made me move to economy. Why? Because she looked at my face and made an assumption in half a second." A few executives shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at the table. I pulled Brenda Kowalski's file. 6 complaints in 8 years, all from passengers of color. All dismissed, all buried. Diane's voice stayed level, but her eyes were steel. Then I pulled files for 30 other attendants. Found similar patterns across the fleet, different faces. Same story. The COO, a white man in his 60s, cleared his throat. "Diane, we have protocols." "Your protocols," Diane interrupted, "protect the company, not the passengers. That ends today." She opened her laptop, turned it so the screen faced the room, clicked play on the video, the one with 7 million views and climbing. They watched in silence. Saw Brenda's hands tear the pass, Diane's calm face, the whispers. When it ended, Diane closed the laptop. "This is our company. This is what we've built. And this is what we're going to dismantle." 30 minutes later, Brenda Kowalski entered the conference room, flanked by her union representative and HR. Her face was pale but defiant. Diane gestured to an empty chair. "Please sit." Brenda sat stiffly. Her lawyer opened a folder. "Ms. Kowalski has been a model employee for 15 years. This incident was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't," Diane said quietly. She looked directly at Brenda. "You didn't misunderstand. You made an assumption. You saw me and decided I didn't belong." Brenda's jaw tightened. "I was following procedure. First-class passengers are supposed to what?" Diane leaned forward. "Look a certain way? You didn't even glance at my boarding pass before you tore it. That's not—" Brenda stopped, swallowed. "I've seen people try to sneak into first class before. I was protecting the integrity of—" "Stop!" Diane's voice cut clean. "I have recordings of you in the galley, laughing about it, saying you know who belongs where, talking about trusting your gut." The room went silent. Brenda's face drained of color. Diane opened a file, slid it across the table. 6 complaints. Amara Okafor, Deshaun Harris, Luis Ortega. 3 others, all dismissed, all people of color, all describing the exact same behavior I experienced. Brenda stared at the pages. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently. "I didn't—" Brenda's voice cracked. "I wasn't trying to. It's not about race. I was doing my job." "Your job," Diane said softly, "is to serve passengers. All passengers. With dignity." "You failed." Brenda's eyes filled with tears. "I've given 15 years to this company. I have a family. I can't lose—" "You should have thought about that," Diane said, "before you tore someone's boarding pass and threw it at their feet." She stood, looked at HR. "Effective immediately, Ms. Kowalski is terminated. No severance beyond contractual minimums. And I want a full audit of every complaint filed in the last decade, every single one that was dismissed without investigation." The HR director nodded, pale but resolute. Brenda's lawyer stood. "We'll fight this. Wrongful termination. You'll lose," Diane said calmly. "I have video evidence, audio recordings, a documented pattern of behavior, and 7 million witnesses." She turned to Brenda. "You're done." Brenda stood, trembling. "You're ruining my life over a mistake." Diane met her eyes. No anger, no triumph, just exhausted certainty. "No, you ruined your own life. I'm just holding you accountable." Security escorted Brenda out. The door closed. The room exhaled. Diane turned to her leadership team. That's one. We have 37 more to review, and then we're going to rebuild this company from the ground up. New training, new accountability, new culture. Anyone who doesn't like it can leave now. No one moved. Good, Diane said. Let's get to work. 3 months later, Diane stood at a podium in Skylift's main hangar. Behind her, a newly painted plane gleamed. Livery redesigned, cabin retrofitted, crew assembled. 500 employees filled the space. Press cameras lined the walls. Diane wore a navy suit and Ms. Lorraine's wings pin on her lapel. When I took this job, she said, I knew we were broken. I didn't know how deeply. But I learned fast. She gestured to the plane behind her. This is Flight 447, the same aircraft I boarded 3 months ago. The same route. But everything else has changed. She outlined the reforms. Mandatory bias training with real consequences. An independent review board for complaints. Zero-tolerance policies. Crew diversity initiatives. Passenger advocacy hotlines. 38 employees were terminated during our audit, Diane continued. 38 people who used their authority to humiliate, exclude, and diminish passengers based on nothing but appearance. That stops now. That stops forever. Applause rippled through the hangar. Tentative at first, then building, Diane raised a hand. But firing people isn't enough. We have to rebuild trust. So starting today, I'll fly one route every month as a regular passenger. No entourage. No warning. I'll see what you see. Feel what you feel. And if something's broken, we'll fix it. She paused, smiled faintly. Because I remember what it's like to watch pilots walk through a hotel lobby and dream of flying. I remember being told I'd never be more than a baggage handler. And I remember the woman who told me to make people say yes. Her voice softened. This company will say yes to everyone, every time. That's the promise. The applause was thunderous now. Cameras flashed. Diane stepped back from the podium, feeling the weight lift just slightly. Later, alone in her office, she opened an email from a passenger, a young black woman who'd been on Flight 447 that day. Thank you for not being silent. Thank you for showing my daughter that we belong everywhere. Diane closed her eyes, touched the wings pin, and whispered, We did it, Ms. Lorraine. 6 months after that flight. Diane sat in seat 1A again. Same route. Different plane, new crew. A flight attendant approached. A young Latina woman with bright eyes. Ms. Matthews, welcome aboard. It's an honor. Diane smiled. Thank you. But today I'm just another passenger. The attendant grinned. We all know who you are. And we're grateful. As the plane lifted off, Diane looked out the window at the world below. Cities and fields. Highways stitching the landscape together. She thought of her mother's hands. Ms. Lorraine's courage. The passengers whose complaints had been buried for years. The children who'd watched her board that day and learned something about power, dignity, and justice. Change was slow, imperfect, exhausting, but it was possible. The flight attendant returned with a glass of water. Anything else, ma'am? No, Diane said. This is perfect. She settled into her seat, closed her eyes, and felt the hum of engines, steady, strong, carrying her forward. Some battles are fought in courtrooms, some in boardrooms, and some, she'd learned, are fought at 35,000 feet with nothing but your dignity and the refusal to be erased. She'd won hers, and she'd make sure no one else had to fight it alone. The plane climbed higher, breaking through clouds into brilliant sunlight. And Diane Matthews, baggage handler, dreamer CEO, finally felt like she was exactly where she belonged,